Good morning and happy Thursday, friends and strangers. It's JDM here, aka Josh David Miller, back again for another edition of my office hours. And this is the end of the year, so we're going to do something slightly different than we ordinarily do. I know it's not technically the end of the year, but this will be the last of these that I am doing in 2022, but I'll be back in 2023. So 30,000 foot view, I want to talk about the most common things that we've been talking about this year. I've kind of boiled it down into two big things having to do with fundraising and having to do with customer discovery, kind of two ends of the early stage spectrum there. So I want to talk about both of those and kind of distill the 50 or so of these that we've done on those two subjects down to a couple of brief points. I want to talk about what's maybe coming up in 2023, and I want to talk just super briefly, a shameless plug for how we might be able to work together if that's something that's interesting to you. And if not, it's okay. I will keep it brief. So with that, these as my weekly office hours. I've been doing them every Thursday at 10 a.m. And I started a little over a year ago in December of last year. And the whole premise was just to answer whatever questions that you guys had. And I started with a co-host with my buddy, Dan Costas Murray, which was a lot of fun. We eventually moved into this format here. And the basic premise was if you have any questions on startup from idea to product market fit, you could submit a little question at the link over here. And if you recorded a video one, I'd play it live. Otherwise, I would just ask it on the air, and we would talk, we would rap, we would chat about whatever you wanted to, having to do with startups. It's been a lot of fun. You guys have been awesome to hang out with. I've had questions in the chat, so hello to everybody who's here right now. And it's been great fun. But there's been a lot of thematic stuff. So it turns out startup founders tend to ask a lot of the same kinds of questions, and there's two like really big themes that I mentioned before that have been coming up a lot, and so I want to kind of dive into those. One again is fundraising, and the other is the customer discovery side. And so I want to distill up some wisdom from there. But before I get too far into things, I have a question for you, which is, where do you need help? So this is my question of the week. It's what I'm going to be really paying attention to over the coming weeks going into 2023 is, where do you guys need help? Are there particular areas of the startup journey where you need help? Are there particular ways that you need help? Are there particular questions that you have, or the tools or resources or people or whatever that are just there on your startup journey that if you had them, if you were able to unlock those, would be powerful? Let me know down in the comments, because I really, really want to know what that is about. And yes, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Laura, to my good friend Laura there. And yes, I agree. Founders are always asking about fundraising, which I think should take us. Let's go right into actually the first one, because it's probably every week I get asked the same thing. And my response, I kind of want to take it in this direction, which is it's not always about funding. And so there's so many ways I could go with this, because the question comes up in either one of a few ways. It's either, can you help me get ready to fundraise? Can you introduce me to an investor? Will you invest? Right? It's all those same kinds of questions. And there's a premise behind all of them that is, that's what's next for me. What's next for me is I need to raise money. That's what's important, is that I have this idea for a startup. I've done some work, maybe. I have some customers, maybe. I have some product, maybe. And in order to unlock the next step, I need money. I need money from investors. I need funding. It's time for me to crush it, to rock and roll, and to kind of power forward. And I just need money in order to do that. And so they're like, okay, well, how do we do that? And they're trying to ask those questions, any of those varied questions. But the premise there is actually what I usually want to challenge, is that it's not that fundraising is bad or fundraising is wrong. It's not, and it's not. Fundraising can be great under the right circumstances, and it can be not great under the wrong circumstances, just like anything else. But it's not a given. And so what I always want to challenge founders to do is, if you're thinking about fundraising is exactly what's next, is to think about two things. The first one is it necessary? Is that what is going to give you the most rapid progress, right? For right now, is that really what you want to do? So think about that. Think about the consequences of that. Think about what that means, not just in terms of equity and cap table and everything else, but also in terms of, is that the smartest path, the strongest path for you? Fundable? Is that the best use of your time right now? Because if you're not super fundable yet, and you're going to have a hard time, raising that money, is it even the right approach for right now? Right. So think about all of that. And then the second thing to think about when it comes to like wanting to raise money is that what happens if you don't get the money? So at a minimum, you're talking about a 6-month cycle to get the money, right? To close a small round, you're talking about months of time, probably 6 months to do it. You're going to be pitching not once or twice or thrice. You're going to be pitching, I don't know, 100 times, right? To try to get the funding you need to close your round. It's a long process. It's an arduous process. It's a lot of work to go through that process. And what happens if it doesn't work? Like, what's your backup plan then? What are you going to do? And I've been in the room, right, when startups are pitching to panelists, and there's a common question that gets asked. And the common question is, what would you do without this money? Right? If you don't close this round, what's your plan? And they're testing how you think about as a founder, and they're doing a few other things too. But you're going to get asked anyway. So you want to figure out, like, even if you don't get the money, what are you going to do? And that's going to connect back to those first things. So you know that even if you don't get the money, you have some type of path forward to try to make forward progress in that space anyway. And there's a much bigger point here, which I can tell that I've incited Laura a little bit here, but with the if you build it, they will fund, right? So like there's a way to change kind of how you think about this. I like to say, it's the same idea that Laura's expressing here, is like, I like to say that if instead of focusing on getting funding from investors, maybe focus on getting funding from customers, right? If you go out and you build a product, or you go out and you get customers, if you get revenue, if you have evidence of buying behavior, if you have a validated pipeline, if there's a there and you've got evidence for it, and that evidence is robust, if you build it, right, then the money will come, because it's going to become a smart bet, right? And so because of that, right, it's the smart thing to try to focus and figure out what you're trying to do, and then get it done, or at least get part of it done, get forward momentum and progress along those lines before you figure out the how to do the fundraising. It's not always about the fundraising itself. So you always want to focus on, like, how do I get the biggest, strongest, greatest validation actually from customers? And so that can look like a few different things, right? And I'll talk about these in a second, because it does relate a little bit to the next question. But just when it comes to funding, right, you have to have this credible theory of hugeness. I think we talked about that last week, or maybe the week before. So you have to have this idea that you can get really big, right? That's what gets investors interested in this kind of risky bet. And you have to have a theory for how you're going to get from where you are to the really big state. And that theory has to be credible. And so that credibility comes in not only your team and your background and the timing and the market, all that stuff. It also comes in your traction and what you've already accomplished to date for this particular project. And that's going to look like, yes, do you have a product? That's a thing, but it's not the most important thing. We've talked before on Masterclass and how they got started, which didn't include a product at all. It included validated customers on both sides of their market, the people producing courses and the people or master classes and the people who are going to be watching them. They got a big, huge validated pipeline on both sides, and then building the platform is the easy part, right? Because they did the hard work there. Right. So that's one way to do it. Another way is, yeah, you can actually build a product and get people using. You can bootstrap it and actually, or even do some hacked together MVP, Wizard of Oz, who knows, Zapier thing, Frankenstein's monster, right? To connect all of these things together in a way that works, and we'll put that in quotes, but it works enough that you get your early adopters to buy and get interested and say, yes, I want this, I'm in, right? And to kind of dive down. So you can hack that thing together and then get fundraising to actually do the thing. Because again, that's not the hard part. Like, building the software isn't the hard part. That's not to say it's not challenging, but it's not the hard part of the startup journey. The hard part is actually building something or creating something that's worth building in the first place. Right. So you want to focus on that side of it. And then, of course, getting, actually getting sales is helpful. Getting actual revenue is helpful. But any evidence of buying behavior on that chain is good. So you want to always think about, like, what is the evidence that they're looking for anyway? Because that evidence that you're getting along the way is what you need to secure the funding anyway. And if you don't get the funding, it's also what you need to keep going. So it's just smart, right? Hedge your bet. When you're thinking about funding, think about, what happens if I don't get it, and what do I need in order to get it? And then focus on those things. Try to get funding from customers before you get funding from investors. So that was my first big thing there, and asked a ton, probably almost every single week, somebody asks me something about fundraising. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Now, a quick detour before we get to our second one. I did want to share. I do also get asked this a lot, so I don't really do any shameless plugs on here very often, unless I have like an upcoming event that I think you guys would be interested in. So I'm gonna take a brief moment just to do a shameless plug. So if you guys do, if you're interested in working with me, I help early stage startups, that's from idea all the way to Series A, make forward progress in the traction space on that. And so that looks like a couple of different things. If you're curious, if you're interested, because while this Office Hours doesn't have a sponsor, it is in a sense sponsored by those of you who choose to work with me and fund my lifestyle to be able to be here creating content. So one of those ways is, if you're curious, you can actually hop over to my website. And if you go to JDM links, there's a /links, there's a collection of resources there that you can use. You can follow me on social media, aside from YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you're watching this right now. You can also connect with me on Mastodon and TikTok and other places. But there's some links in there for my newsletter and so forth. But there's also a place where you can go to book time on my calendar. So if you are at one of those really challenging points of the startup journey, and you want to figure out, how do I go from where I am to getting fundable? How do I cross that chasm? How do I figure out what the right prototype is? How do I, improve my business model, or come up with a good business model for this thing that I'm working on? Or how do I improve my startup pitch? Anything like that, you can actually just book time directly with me, hop on for an hour or 90 minutes, depending on the session. You can book it right there, get on my calendar and get it done. So that's an awesome way to work together. I also have a coaching program. I keep that small. There's limited availability, but this is where we work together on a regular basis. So every week or every other week, depending on how much time you're dedicating to your startup, we hop on one-on-one video, and then we do tons of support offline, use the same tools and techniques that I use for startups to get them there. So that's all if you're like pre-seed. Those are two great ways to connect together. If you're between seed and Series A, if you're trying to get to that Series A level, and that doesn't necessarily have to tie to fundraising, we just think of those as benchmarks, then you can also connect with me, and we can talk about doing a design sprint, which isn't just me. It's also I bring my team along. And this is where we work on desirability, viability, feasibility, work on go-to-market, sales execution, your market readiness, all of the little things that you need to do in order to really level up and find traction. So we do these little traction sprints. They're these multi-day events together on site or virtually with your team and mine, and we come up with a nice, good traction roadmap for that. So I wanted to offer those a little bit there. So if anybody's curious about working with me, you can check that out and get connected. But otherwise, shameless plug complete. Hope you guys are working on something awesome in 2023, and let me know what it is anyway. But let me check here. We got some good comments, and then I do have one more big point to go through here. Yes, Laura's, I knew I would trigger her by all this funding thing here, but yes, so many startups bootstrap and become extremely successful. I don't know why we just assume as a culture that you have to get fundraising. It's just not true. Just not true. No, Mastodon is. So everybody's leaving Twitter, right? Everybody's running away from Twitter, and Mastodon is an awesome distributed social platform and protocol. It's pretty cool. You should look it up. Like you're a Twitter queen, Laura, so you'll fit right in on Mastodon. Mastodon's pretty awesome. And you can definitely connect with me on Mastodon. That's pretty cool too. We got June in the house today. Hello, June. When you began your startup journey, never knew it was going to be huge learning, testing, and time in the chair. Yes, it is. It's always more to learn and more to think about there. So glad that you're here. Glad to be a small part of your journey. Glad you're a part of mine as well. Okay, so we got a big one here from David. Let's digest this here for a second here. Question about incentivizing options and getting domain experts into a startup team when you're in the discovery stage. Okay, good question. You found a viable problem to solve and pitch domain experts, and they want to join the team, but can't leave the security of the current employment until the startup can get off the ground and bring revenue to pay them. Okay, how do you incentivize people when you can't just throw cash at them and they can't also leave their current job? So this is an interesting question, and this comes up in the context of venture capital all the time, where there's a bias, or there can be a big bias in Silicon Valley, particularly where you have just generally more affluent founders, and so you'll get VCs who don't realize that not everybody can afford to just self-fund their lifestyle, for 6 months or for a year or for 2 years while they build out a startup. And that's just the founders, not to mention the people that the founders need to help along their way. And if you're just kind of getting started with an idea, and so you don't really have a thing yet, so there's no revenue, and you need to get the people involved, it's like the same idea. It's like we can't all just quit our day jobs and kind of run with this full force. So very good question. And there's a couple ways to think about it. The traditional, like, technical direct answer to this question is, well, you're supposed to incentivize them with equity, which is true, but equity is a long-term play, and that's the point. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So one reason is that it's a big, that's a big chip that you have, right? There's big potential in the thing that you're working on. Second is that there's an intrinsic motivational alignment. So if they're invested in the success of the thing, because their success is also tied to the success of the thing, because they make money off of equity, and also because it's a chip that you have to play in the early stage game that makes something of outsized value, and it attracts people who are interested in certain risk and all that stuff. So that part is good and right and true, but that's not a very helpful answer. So there's a couple of other things to think about as well. So one is that it's important to get different kinds of people involved. So not everybody has to be an employee. Not everybody has to be, somebody that is working all day. If you need access to a particular expertise, there's lots of ways to get that, even from advisory boards, which you don't pay necessarily at all. These are people, mentors that you collect along the way. People are interested in helping you out and, answering questions and doing all of that. You can access mentors. That's going to depend on the specifics of what you're working on in geography and everything else, but there's so many ways that you can just get access to people to help you along your journey. I'm fortunate enough to be a part of the entrepreneurial community here in Sacramento, and it's awesome and super supportive, and there are so many resources, and they're dedicated people. Like I just highlighted Laura's comments a moment ago, and she's one of these people. And we have a lot of organizations that are also dedicated to helping entrepreneurs. So we have this like plethora of programs and people that are out there that are willing to help, and a lot of communities have the same thing. And even if your community doesn't, there's an electronic community of which Sacramento is part as well, where you can get access to this stuff. So they don't all have to be employees, right? So that's another completely different side of it. So you can pay them, you can do complete equity if they've got the time. Then there's like the non-paid people, there's consultants and contractors or whatever you can pay small amounts to. There's outsourcing overseas and all other things that you can do, all of which carry several asterisks that I won't get into right now. But another way to think about this is that is by the metaphor that I use a lot, which is about right sizing your bet. Right. So you want anytime you're putting money or time, energy, thought, anything into whatever it is that you're working on, you're making some kind of bet, a bet that this is going to pay off. Even if you let's say you just wanted to get a job somewhere, and so you go and interview and you get offered a position at this new place, your choice about whether or not to accept that is also part of this bet. Like you're making a bet that you're going to have longevity there, that you can leave this current job, that it's going to work out there, that it's going to be productive for you and all that stuff. You're making a little bet there. And so you have all this evidence from the interviews, from job descriptions, from what you know about career and everything else that you assess into that process to say, this is a smart bet for me. So we're always making these bets, and we're always trying to figure out, are they smart bets? Are they not smart bets? Are they the right size bet? Like, is the amount of evidence that I have proportional to the size of the bet that I'm making in? That's like poker, and you get your two cards in the hole, and you take a look at them, and you're first up after the blind, you're like, all in, yeah, there's times when that's appropriate, but that's not your everyday bet, right? Because it's just too big based on the evidence you have, which is only the two cards in the hole. So when it comes time to the startup effort that you're working on, you want to do that too. And so diving straight in and quitting your day job is almost always a bad move. Because you don't have enough evidence yet to warrant making that big of an investment. So then you start small, you start on weekends, you start on nights and doing these different things. And you want to start collecting people who are thinking about that the same way. So you want them to be starting to put in a little time here, a little time there, to start with founder dating and all of that, where are we the right fit for each other? And okay, can we accomplish these tasks? And you do that kind of work over time. And pretty soon your side job can become less and less of a side job and more of your main thing. But you're always making that kind of thing as well. So if you if you're trying to figure out like, how do I incentivize people to get involved? There's two different things to think about when we talk about incentive. And one of them is like, they literally need some type of security in terms of money. That's one way to think about it. So how do I get them, pay them, to be involved in this thing because they have a job that provides them their lifestyle. The second way to think about it is how do I incentivize them psychologically to be interested in this? And I would say, don't play that game. If it's about like having to convince them to be involved in this and they're not interested in this, they're the wrong type anyway. If they're after only a paycheck, that's what's interested to them. If they're just somebody who wants a job at a place, they are a bad early hire for a startup. You don't want people like that anyway. You want people who are entrepreneurial, who will wear many hats, who will be flexible and dynamic. It's going to be something akin to a marriage or a weird partnership. And so when you think about those early people, you want them to already be incentivized because they're like, yes, I see the problem you're working on. This is awesome. This can be huge. I want in. I can't quit my job, but I want in, right? That's what you want. And then you figure, okay, so how do we fill in the details there? At the end. So yes, and I can see we got some agreement. Yes. Aha. Definitely focus on those kinds of things as well. So yeah. With that, let's move on to the next big theme that I've seen throughout the questions you guys have asked me this year, which has usually to do with customer discovery or customer validation. There's something like, oh, how do I get this in front of customers? How do I figure out if customers are interested? How do I get customers to buy? How do I get in front of customers? How do I prototype this for customers, engage their interest and all that? And the one big piece of advice that I think that I would come back to at the end of all of this is to what I would say is to close your time to customer to zero. So your time to customer means like, okay, we're thinking about something, we have an idea for something, and then it takes a certain amount of time before that idea gets put in front of a customer. That's your time to customer, right? You want to close that basically to zero, or get it as close to zero as you possibly can. So the big miss is really connected to right-sizing your bets, coincidentally. But the big thing that you want to think about here is that the longer something stays in your head, the more work you do in your head or in the real world, the more code that you write or whatever that you work on before it gets into the customer, the more you're increasing the risk. And sometimes that bet is appropriate and it just takes time. So sometimes, we're going to go do this feature. It's going to take us 6 weeks and we'll go heads down and we'll get an early version of this and put it in front of a customer. And that's not wrong, as long as it's worth a 6-week bet, right? So if it is, that's great. And then your time to customer is as narrow as it possibly can be. And this is where we come up with the MVP for that feature. How do we get it in there narrow as possible? We don't need this. We don't need that. We'll add these later. This doesn't come in week 7. This can come in week 12. But week 6, we're getting to this thing, right? And getting that small thing. You want to close that as much as possible. And the earlier are you on in the journey, the less evidence you have. And so we get this tragedy all the time where founders will spend 6 months, a year, 18 months, 24 months building a product and then trying to figure out how to get it to customers. Their time to customer was huge. It's this massive, massive risk that they took. They gambled. They went all in after just looking at their cards in first position. It's like, what were you thinking, right? You don't want to do that. You want to make the time to customer as narrow as possible. So here's some ways you can do that. And we already talked about some of these in response to the other questions. So one is like, okay, if you have an idea for a thing, you're like, oh, this looks like a problem we could solve with this piece of software or whatever, and that we want to do that. What's the first thing you can do? The first thing you do is go that day, shoot where the customer is and talk to them. Time to customer, 0 days. Go out in front of them. Do they have the problem? Do they have the problem you think they do? Are they thinking about it the same way? What have they tried? And you go, that's where you engage in those interviews and develop that process, right? So there's that. Next is you could say, okay, well, now we have a clarification on the problem. Now we need to know, do they want my solution, right? And so then you can put a value prop in front of them and see if it resonates. You can do that on the phone. You can do that with a landing page, as long as you have means of getting in front of people. You can do it on a social post. You can do it with phone calls. You can do it with LinkedIn in messages. You can do it with DMs, however, right? You can get in front of somebody to put a value prop. Once you get a value prop, you can also put a rapid prototype in front of them, something that takes you an hour to create, right? If it's software, let's say, you can create something in Google Slides, throw it all together and go boop, and put that in front of somebody and say, use this thing, and then see if you get that back. And then you spend an hour on a thing. And if it doesn't go right, if they don't go, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever, I want this, take my money, where do I sign? If you don't get that reaction, you go back and then you spend another hour or maybe less and you iterate on that prototype, and then you go back and put it in front of customers. It doesn't work, but that's not the point. The point was to validate that if it did work, is the customer going to go, yes, this makes my life so much better than I otherwise thought it would be. And then, yeah, eventually that's going to come to building something that's real, and that takes longer, and that gets bigger and bigger over time. But think about this, making the time to customer, the time that something's in your head, the time to put in front of customer, as small as possible. And if it ever becomes months or years or something like that, you're probably doing it wrong. Unless you're really, really far along in the process, you're doing it wrong. It's always super, super, super narrow for when you want to do that, right? And there are lots of exceptions to this. In certain verticals, certain niches. I don't want to really get into it too much. Laura was calling out one like deep tech and biotech. This can be super problematic as well, because they require huge upfront investment, and there's regulatory hurdles and everything else. So there's lots of exceptions that we'll put asterisks on those. But you want to make it as narrow as is possible for your niche, which I think Laura agrees with there. So that's kind of that. So yeah, there is that. I think we will probably maybe call it there, unless you guys got anything else burning. Let me check the chat here and see if there's anything pressing in here. I think we're probably good. This is going to be, as I said, the last of the office hours for 2022. So taking a couple of weeks off. I don't have the exact date when we'll be back. It'll either be the first or the second week in January, maybe at the same time, maybe at a different time. So stay tuned for that. Sign up for my email list if you want to stay in the loop or on that. And I'll definitely let you guys know. Otherwise, keep an eye out on whatever channel you're on, and I'll announce it in advance, not just the morning of, so that we can get back on together. But in the meantime, I've left this question up here because I really do want to know, what is it that you guys need help? Where do you need help? Is it particular questions? Is it areas? Is it there things that you're focusing on? Are there resources or people or whatever? What is the thing that's going to help you like make rapid forward progress, either from the idea stage all the way to Series A, anywhere in that journey? Where is it that you need help? I'm here to help. I want to at least connect you with some resources if I can. Otherwise, have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. Have an amazing holiday with whatever holiday or holidays you may choose to celebrate. Happy winter solstice. Happy New Year. And I will see everybody in 2023. Peace out, y'all. Thanks so much.